I'm Noah. Let's watch some videos. Subscribe.
There's a lot of talk about sending humans to Mars, but no one talks about Venus. Why not? And could Venus actually be the better option for a human colony?
Isn't it hotter on Venus than it is on the sun?
Going to Mars has been a fixture in our collective cultural consciousness for a very long time. It's inspired more sci-fi movies and stories.
Unless we sit in the clouds, I guess.
And a Twitter following for the Mars rover that's almost 2 million strong. Meanwhile, Venus has inspired, what? 2 Ray Bradbury stories, a plant that eats flies, and a razor? Basically, Venus has the worst public relations team in the solar system. And that hurts our sister planet not just in culture and media, but in space policy. Presidents Bush and Obama and the Chinese government have all outlined goals for manned missions to Mars. The Dutch nonprofit group Mars One even held an international competition to find volunteers for a one-way mission to the Martian surface. But Venus? No manned mission love at all. Which is odd.
Let me say, and this is before I've gotten into the entire thing. We just the tip of the iceberg. But I'm thinking one thing about Venus versus Mars is that Mars has ground that we can step on, that we know we can just step on. I won't say there's no way that by the end of this, he's going to have us on ground of Venus. I could be wrong, but I think we're going to be floating in the clouds at some point. Versus what we know, which is land. That's probably also, it's really close to the sun. I don't want to be that close. It's bright outside. When it's bright.
Since in most respects, Venus is actually an easier and less costly colonization target than Mars is. For starters, Venus is closer to Earth. That's why we sent probes to Venus long before we sent them to Mars, and why we sent more of them. Depending on the launch window, the round trip can be 30 to 50% shorter, which is a major factor for manned missions. Shorter trips means less weightlessness and radiation, less food and water to carry, and thus less fuel and lower cost. This would also be a huge advantage in moving the people and equipment necessary to actually colonize another world. Because bear in mind, there's no Craigslist in space. If we ever start a colony, we'll need to bring along almost everything. And it's not just the shorter trip. The planet itself has some significant advantages over Mars. It's closer to the sun, which means about 4 times more available solar power than you have on Mars. It also has a thick atmosphere, unlike that wispy layer on Mars. That means better protection from space radiation and meteorites for our enterprising colonizers and their future cities. It also means more available carbon dioxide, from which, in principle, you might extract oxygen. But the real kicker is gravity. Venus has about 0.9 Earth-Gs, pretty close, while Mars has less than 0.4. And one thing we do know is that prolonged low gravity is bad for humans. How bad? In Earth orbit, astronauts lose bone mass at about 10 times the rate of someone with advanced osteoporosis. Now, no one knows exactly how bad Martian gravity would be for humans, but it's definitely not going to be good. On Venus, that's far less of a concern. And remember, we're talking about long-term colonization, not just visits. Even if we had the technological means to add water to a planet's surface and oxygen to its air, changing a planet's surface gravity is currently not even within the realm of discussion. So terraforming seems silly if people couldn't live there more than a few months without their bones falling apart. A theoretical Venusian colony thus seems to have a lot going for it. So why then this tunnel vision for Mars? Surfacism. Okay, I just made that word up, but hear me out. Ever since the days of seafaring exploration,
that's what I said.
Had an obsession with landing on the surface. If you don't plant a flag on something, it's almost like having gotten there doesn't count.
It's hot as hell up there.
So what's all this have to do with Venus, which actually has a solid surface? It does, but humans can't land on it.
Once again.
See, there's a teensy problem with temperature. There's so much CO2 on Venus that the greenhouse effect makes the surface hotter than hell. Over 450 degrees Celsius, well above the melting point of lead. But the bigger problem is the barometric pressure on the surface. It's over 90 Earth atmospheres. That means that landing on the Venusian surface would be like diving 1 kilometer underwater on Earth, far beyond the crush depth of most military submarines. In fact, most probes that NASA and the Soviets sent to the surface of Venus imploded in midair. We learned our lesson, and a few reinforced probes did manage to touch down and send images of the Venusian surface, but even those only lasted about 2 hours before, The point is, I think surfacism is a real bias, and the fact that we can't live on the Venusian surface could help explain why Mars gets all the hype. But maybe that's sensible. I mean, if the
That's what I thought. That was the first thing I thought. Surfacism. Because I knew you could not land on where are we? Venus. I knew we couldn't land on Venus. So I'm like, well then, so now we got to be up in the clouds. And that's not something we're used to. So now you got to have us wrap our mind around that we're never actually going to be standing on the surface. Whereas Mars, I'm just chilling, strolling around. It's just a lot easier to wrap my mind around. Thus, more literature, sci-fi, because what are we going to do? It's hard as hell to write Venus just floating around in this. Get out of here, Venus. I got a bias towards Mars too. Come on, Mars, let's kick it up.
Surface will kill us. There's no point in going there, right? Not so fast. See, around 50 kilometers or 30 miles above the Venusian surface, some interesting things happen. First, the temperature drops to only about 70 degrees Celsius. That's still super hot, but firefighting equipment on Earth can withstand proximity to forest fires with temperatures that reach over 2,000 degrees Celsius. The pressure at that altitude also drops to almost exactly one Earth atmosphere. That means humans would need heat-resistant clothing and oxygen masks, but not spacesuits, to walk around in that environment. Granted, there's the minor nuisance of sulfuric acid floating around in the Venusian air, but that's potentially manageable. And at that altitude, the atmosphere is still dense enough for lots of stuff to float, like balloons filled with helium, or maybe filled even with just regular Earth air. Throw in the favorable gravity, and it starts to look like the upper atmosphere of Venus might be the closest thing in the solar system to an Earth-like environment. So, it might make sense to colonize Venus with cloud cities. I am not making this up. NASA's Systems Analysis and Concepts Directorate has unveiled a conceptual blueprint for this scheme. They call it the High Altitude Venus Operational Concept, or
Mob Deep.
HAVOC. Interesting branding choice, but awesome. Still, we've linked the NASA videos in the description. You should check them out. Now, for the record, this is all still conceptual. We are very far from sending this guy to lead our Venusian cloud city.
You got a lot of guts coming here.
But NASA is taking the idea seriously. Right now, most of the chatter is still about using Venus as practice for colonies elsewhere, like Mars. So we haven't overcome surfacism just yet. But this might change. The gravity issue alone might make Venus the go-to option for long-term human habitation. And who knows? Centuries from now, if we learn how to sequester enough carbon out of its atmosphere, we might even be able to plant a flag or two. So what do you guys think? Is Venus a better colonization option than Mars?
No!
Put your 2 cents in the comments.
Here's something to know about me. I would have been a physicist if it were not for Satan's chain letter. Instead, I'm the opposite of a physicist. I'm a clown. Actor. Always get that wrong. I love the challenge to try to build a civilization on Venus. We got to get off this planet at some point in time, whether it's supervolcano, asteroids, nukes, or a million other things that could wipe us off the planet.
You damn dirty ape!
We should at some point be interplanetary. Hey, if you find yourself still watching this video and have not subscribed yet, you should go to your room and think about your choices.